I can think of few examples of a person courageously facing the unknown and uncertain that live up to the example of a woman named Deborah Surl. Have any of you heard of Deborah Surl? Good. It's rare we bring something original. Deborah Surl is a British woman who in 2001 found herself alone in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on a rowboat for 111 days. Deborah had entered a rowing race from the western coast of the continent of Africa to Barbados with her husband. She was an adventurer, had always wanted to be a professional adventurer, had climbed mountains, inner and outer, and had signed up for this rowing race with her husband, who was a professional competitive rower. Their boat arrived. Everyone had to build the same boat for the race, and so it arrived in a box like IKEA. They built this boat the first boat they had ever built, prepared for the race, trained in the River Thames. And on the day of the race began, they loaded up their boat, this rowboat, with food for 60 days. She and her husband, the supplies for navigation that they would need, and they set off. 2 or 3 days in, they discovered that her husband, this competitive rower, had a debilitating phobia of open water. The only races that they had ever been in together, or he had been in, had happened in rivers or lakes, places where you could see the shore and you knew you could find your way back home. When the shore receded from vision and they were in the open water of the unknown sea, he began to have debilitating panic attacks. He lost a tremendous amount of weight in only a week's time, and they called in a rescue boat to come and take him. Deborah Surl decided that she would continue the rest of the journey alone. And so, in a journey that was supposed to take 60 days or less, she found herself a first-time rower, alone, for 111 days in the uncertain seas. Every day she would have to eat 8,000 calories for all the fuel she was burning. Because of big container ships that would come by and maybe knock her off course, she could only sleep at 20 minutes per time in a small coffin-shaped structure at the back of the boat. When she went to sleep, she would wake up to find that either the winds and the currents had blown her miles toward her destination, or she had lost every bit of progress she had made throughout the day. During this journey, she would sleep in her little coffin, gobble down food as quickly as she could, these little rehydrated food packets, sometimes journey by the stars or navigation system, and occasionally make a phone call from a satellite phone, and her bill was 12,000 pounds when she got done. In a hero's journey, you always encounter friends and foes. Her friends were sea turtles that would come to the side of the boat because she was moving so slowly. Barnacles and seaweed started to grow from her boat. They would come and play at the water's edge, seals and sea turtles, and look at her. Someone had given her a teddy bear to carry with her, and she said that whoever wrote the movie Castaway had gotten it right, that she started to have long, important conversations with this teddy bear. She would make a lifeline call to her twin sister, but mostly she was alone. The foes that she encountered were things like hurricanes. And when the storm waters came, she would have to dive into the small coffin-shaped box at the back of the boat, huddle down and wait until the boat was done being tossed around to find out what was left. Or sharks, that as they moved through the water in the night would pulse through bioluminescent algae and creatures in the water, making lightning strikes in the water, coming closer to her and making her afraid. Or huge shipping containers that could not see her, didn't pick her up on the radar, and couldn't move quick enough. During one moment of despair, she found herself being tossed up against the side of this monstrous shipping container, pushing aside with the oar, hoping not to be sucked under. She called her sister on the satellite phone saying, "I cannot do this anymore, I'm frightened." And her sister's response was, "You need to choose your better attitude." Her response was, "Excuse me? You're sitting having tea somewhere in London and I am fighting for my life." And her sister said, "Deborah, choose your attitude." And so every day when she got up, she would write in a journal what attitude she would choose for the day. They weren't all passive. Some was courage, some was fierceness or anger, some was acceptance, but she would choose the inner compass that would guide her for the day. She said that on the open water, she found God in a way that she didn't expect, and the beauty of the world and its ferocity. She found her place of control in the uncertain, which was her ability to choose her attitude. She found that she was capable of more than she had ever thought, alone in the ocean for 111 days. The story of Moses from the Hebrew Scriptures, I think, is a lot more like Deborah Surl's version of things than Charlton Heston's version of things. In the movie version that I grew up watching as a kid, Moses stands upon the uncertain shore of the sea and is as confident as any human has ever been. The waters have parted, freedom is on the other side, I see exactly where to go, and God is on my side. Thank you very much. But the scriptural story is far from that. As Daniel mentioned last week in his sermon, when Moses first encounters God in that passage and says, "Take off your shoes, you're standing on holy ground," the name that God gives Moses is, "I'm not going to tell you my name." The God of the burning bush says to Moses, "I know your people are seeking freedom from this oppressive life in Egypt. Follow me and listen to my instructions." And Moses says, "Well, first, why don't you just tell me what your name is?" And that God says, "You want to know my name? My name is I am." Or in the Hebrew translation, "I am what is becoming," or "I am what was, is, and will be." I am what I am, Moses, get on with it. He's told to take his people who are in slavery and oppressed in the midst of poverty and violence and cross the sea, which God promises will part and things will be okay and a new life will be on the other side of that ocean. And this guy thinks he has the creator of the universe on his side. And he's still nervous. He still begs that God to choose someone else and says, no, I'm bad at public speaking. I'm a stutterer. No one will believe me. And then when he gets to the water's edge, one of my favorite interpretations of that is not the Charlton Heston version, but one that many rabbis for thousands of years have interpreted, not that the waters parted all at once, but that the water only parted as far as Moses was willing to step. And then it was uncertain, and then it was uncertain, and so on until freedom. That's kind of what life feels like. In the most important transformative moments of my life, I have never been presented with an absolutely clear sea where the creator of the universe clearly said to me, "Things are going to be okay, don't worry." Often the waters have parted one day at a time at best. I'm not surprised that so many images of God show up in the storm, in the wind, in the fire, in the rain, in the sea, in the earthquake, in the power of the seasons, or in the birth of a new child. A life that we cannot fully comprehend or control. A creative force beyond all knowing that will keep creating over and over and over again, which must mean it's by definition totally unknowable and uncertain to us. In traditional Christian theology, God even seeks an uncertain relationship with humanity and with you. That whole free will thing seems to imply that even God in the story doesn't know how things are going to turn out for you or what you will choose. I know that line of thinking kind of messes with the all-knowing part of the definition of God too, but that's why theology is complicated. Even in the most traditional environments, the idea that you have freedom and a choice means that your story, God's story, and the story of the world isn't complete yet. Science teaches us that far from the fixed universe that Newton taught us about, where you drop an apple and it just falls to the ground, at the smallest level, life is made up of chaos and possibility. Quantum physics teaches us that it's impossible to know where the smallest particles of matter are until we observe them, and even then, it might be theoretically possible for them to be at two places at the same time. I don't understand it, I don't have to, but I believe them. What we're learning now is that at the smallest possible level, every atom is pregnant with possibility and chaos and mystery and uncertainty. That far from a fixed life and a fixed story, at the root of all matter and creation and reality itself is an uncertain, unfinished mystery. And that's really beautiful for me to theorize on. And when it's my life, I don't like it. I want an answer to what's going to happen next when it occurs with my health, or with my kids, with my church, or my job, or my sense of identity and safety. I don't just go rushing into uncertainty with a joyful glee in those moments. Rarely ever, to be honest with you. In our lives, our rush into the uncertain probably shows up in a lot more mundane ways than the seas parting or a journey across the ocean, but it probably feels like a journey across the ocean nonetheless. How many of you have faced a moment where you thought to yourself, who in the world am I going to be if that person leaves me? Who will I be if she dies? How am I going to understand who I am or what I'm capable of after this job is over? Or now that I have this diagnosis, or the fact that my body doesn't work the way that it used to? What's going to happen to my kids? These are more everyday questions, but they feel like you're standing at the shore, waiting for the water to part a day at a time at best. And in my experience, life shows its fragility in those moments. It's like a different world, better or worse, is possible on a moment's notice. I'm sure you've experienced this. All it takes is one text message, and suddenly, everything's different. A new life shows up in the mail in an envelope, or a doctor's phone call, or a board meeting. A meeting with your supervisor or with someone at your city or your family. It happens right after you say the words, I love you or I don't. But on the turn of these minute little things, a few words, a text message, for better or for worse, life will never be the same. The biggest thing changing from the smallest. So I'm not surprised that I, and I think other people, don't do uncertainty all that well. Maybe life is infused with a holy possibility at the subatomic level, but for me, it's scary. When your identity, your ego, your body, your marriage, your job, your safety, your nation is at risk, uncertainty can be a terribly frightening thing. Anybody who's gotten a bad call from a doctor doesn't think that we just dance into the unknown with rose-colored glasses. Anyone who's ever been up late waiting to see if their kid would come home, or other moments like that, knows that uncertainty isn't always a joyful experience. And all of us in the room share at least one big unknown. What will happen at the end of our lives when this whole thing is over? No matter what we think, no matter what anybody has told us, no matter how we have read or prepared, when the moment comes, if we're honest, nobody in this room really knows what that uncertain sea will look like in its finality. And so I understand why I tend to, and other people do, cling and find my certainty and security in things that are neither certain nor secure. I am my job. I am my relationships. I am my 401k plan, or this house, or my health, or my body, or 1,000 other things which are so easy to hold on to for dear life, until we find out that even those things are fragile and fleeting too. It's easy to cling to the known life. It makes sense. It feels safe and secure. In the Moses narrative, when he and his brother Aaron are leading people through the desert and then to the water's edge, the people repeatedly say, "Why are you doing this to us? We don't know what's going to happen." And actually, back in Egypt, at least they fed us. They chose the known life and the known oppression, even though it was not life-giving at all, because it felt at least safe and secure. And I think we do that all the time. I'm going to stay at this job even though it feels like it's not giving me a sense of purpose and direction in life. I'm going to stay in this relationship. I'm going to keep this pattern of being that I know is not healthy, but at least it provides order to my life. But there comes a time when the known life that you have is no longer a life at all. When the known life is not livable or tenable anymore. In addiction circles, people often refer to this as hitting bottom. And as hard as it is often a revelatory moment that tells you you can live a different kind of life. And it comes through fragility and pain and loss and all sorts of other things. But you don't have to face addiction to know that sometimes the life that you know very well is not the life you want to live anymore. You find yourself saying, "I don't know who I'm going to be without drinking, but I know that I can't do this anymore. I don't care if it's uncertain on the other side. I don't know who I'm going to be without this job, or without this partner, or without this home, or without this habit, but I have to do something different to live." Does that make sense? In those moments when the unknown life is no longer livable, uncertainty starts to hold holy potential. And the horizon isn't as frightening as it is exciting, and open water becomes preferable to the known shore. Maybe some of you are in that position right now. There's something magical that happens in that moment, when uncertainty becomes possibility and freedom and liberation, even if you don't know how it's going to turn out. You find yourself in those moments as if you're standing on the bow of a ship looking over the horizon with a story that is not done yet. My guess is if you look back to those critical moments in your life, you have found that there have been times when you said, "I don't know how I'm going to survive this." And yet here you are. You're still here. You found yourself saying, "I don't know what I'm going to do without that job, or that person, or without that drink, or without that sense of identity," and yet here you are, survived it 1,000 times over. Life in the world is uncertain, not just at the subatomic level, but day to day, and we can control so very little of what happens to us. The phone call will come. Sometimes the job does end, the relationship does end, or the diagnosis does come, or life doesn't turn out for better or worse in the way that we planned, and we can control so little. But one thing we can control is the heart that we carry with us on the journey. We can decide what sort of attitude we will carry with us in the day, like Deborah Surl did. We can decide what kind of human we are crafting in this place. What practices will develop courage, compassion, strength, and wisdom. We can decide whether we want to be guided by love and courage or fear and greed. You do get to choose which heart you carry in your chest. You also get to choose which people will help you build that heart. That's part of what this is. Church is supposed to be the place, and is, where no matter what happens to you, someone shows up and says, "We're glad you're here." The place where people accept that you are unfinished and help you build a loving and strong and resilient heart. It's the place where when things are uncertain and you feel like you failed, you can still show up and find someone else to row with you for a little bit. You also get to choose which God you listen to, which lighthouse you follow, and which you don't. Some of them lead to a new and better life, and some to utter destruction. Choose a good heart to carry with you on the journey, and choose good people to be your companions, and know that your story isn't finished, and the same God and the same force which turns single-cell organisms into symphony orchestras is moving in your bones. The world is uncertain, but how you encounter it doesn't have to be. May you proceed with courage and love and a strength beyond all naming. May it be so, and amen.